I was a man who had it all: intelligence, a career as a university professor, and a life that I thought was fulfilling. I was confident in my abilities and comfortable in the life I had built. I had no need for anything beyond what I could see, what I could touch, what I could prove. I thought I knew everything there was to know about the world. But what I didn't know, what I had no idea of, was that I was missing the one thing that could transform my life forever: a relationship with God. My story isn't just about what happened after I died. It's about everything that led me to that moment, and how it completely changed who I am. You see, I wasn't always someone who believed in anything beyond the physical world. I lived a life of intellect, of logic, of things that could be reasoned and understood. And yet, when the moment of my death came, everything I thought I knew about life, about everything, was turned upside down. I grew up in a good family. My parents were kind, but they didn't speak of God. I didn't need God. At least, that's what I thought. I found my answers in the books I read, the thinkers I admired. I didn't see any reason to believe in something that couldn't be seen or touched. To me, it was all just superstition. As I moved through life, I couldn't reconcile the idea of God with everything I knew. I was a professor, teaching young minds, shaping them to think critically, logically. Faith, to me, was something for the weak. For people who couldn't face the harsh realities of life. My reality was grounded in reason. And that was enough. But even in a life so grounded in logic, there are moments when the unexpected comes knocking. In 1985, my health began to fail, seemingly without warning. A routine hospital visit would become the most profound moment of my life, a moment that would strip away everything I thought I knew. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. One minute, I was teaching a class, and the next, I was in a hospital bed, unable to breathe. My body was shutting down. I felt like I was suffocating. There was no time to prepare for what was about to come. I remember lying there in the hospital room. I didn't panic at first. I was an atheist. I didn't believe in life after death. So I thought death would just be the end. No more worries, no more pain, just darkness. But what happened next was something I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. I wasn't afraid. I thought I was just slipping into unconsciousness. But then it happened. I felt myself leave my body. It was as if my soul had been lifted, and I was floating above myself, watching the doctors working below. I could see them, but I wasn't in my body anymore. I wasn't me. At first, I was confused. It was all so strange. But soon, I started to feel something that filled me with dread. I couldn't see clearly, but I could sense it. There was something, someone, there with me, and the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't alone. The closer I got to that feeling, the stronger it became. It wasn't a voice, not a sound, but a presence that gripped me. The figures that surrounded me seemed distant, cold. The further I moved, the darker it felt. And the darkness seemed to respond, swirling, twisting. My fear grew as I realized that I was no longer in control. I was being pulled somewhere, and it wasn't where I thought I was going. There was no escape. The coldness, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of being lost, it all surged. I tried to turn, to move, but I couldn't. It felt as if something was watching, waiting, as I was swept along with no way of stopping. In the midst of the swirling, overwhelming fear, something broke through the confusion. In the distance, a light appeared. It wasn't bright in the way a spotlight would be, but it shone with a kind of power, a presence that pierced through the darkness. And from that light I saw him. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. I was frozen, caught between fear and awe. But as the figure drew closer, everything changed. The fear that had gripped me so tightly began to loosen. The oppressive darkness started to fade. And then, standing before me, was a presence, alive, full of peace and understanding. I knew, even without words, that this was Jesus. He didn't need to speak for me to understand. In his gaze, I felt something shift within me. It was as if he knew everything about me, every fear, every doubt, every wrong choice. But he didn't condemn me. Instead, there was only love. A love so pure, so deep, that it washed over me like a flood. I didn't deserve it. I couldn't understand it. But there it was. In that moment, everything else faded away. All the doubts, all the logic, all the intellectual arguments I had built my life around, none of it mattered. What mattered was the love he showed me. What mattered was the peace that filled the space between us. And then he spoke. Not in a way that required sound, but in a way that went deeper than words. He simply said, "You're not lost. You are loved." And with that, everything in me changed. The fear that had once gripped me, the coldness that had threatened to consume me, was gone. It was replaced by a sense of warmth, a sense of home. And in that moment I knew, beyond any doubt, that he was real. I knew that this wasn't just some abstract figure from ancient history, but the living, breathing presence of God. I was standing before him, and for the first time in my life, I understood what true peace felt like. What happened next was a choice. I had been given a moment to choose, return to my body, to my life, or stay in this place of love and peace. I wasn't ready to leave. But in that moment I knew I had to return. There was still more to do, more to understand. And with that I found myself back in the hospital room, my body, once again, breathing. The doctors were working, trying to revive me, and as I woke up, I realized that I was forever changed. I knew that the life I had known was over. It was no longer about intellect, about proving things through reason. It was about something greater than that, a love that could not be explained, a presence that could not be ignored. From that moment on, I understood that there was more to life than I had ever known. And I knew that I had to share this truth with others, to help them understand what I had experienced. Because what I found on the other side of death was not just an encounter, it was a transformation. And that transformation, that love, was what I had been searching for all my life. As we continue with this story, please do well to subscribe for more testimonies of faith. I was born and raised in a loving family, but we weren't religious. My parents were not churchgoers, and faith was never something we discussed. We lived our lives without much regard for any kind of higher power. There was no Bible on the shelf, no prayers at the table, no church on Sundays. I grew up in a home where the focus was on the practical aspects of life, success, education, and personal achievement. Religion simply wasn't part of the conversation, and it wasn't something I ever felt I needed. I had a good childhood, but I always felt there was something missing, a sense of purpose or deeper meaning. I could feel that there was more to life than what I was seeing around me, but I didn't know what that was. I was searching, even as a child, for something that could explain life in a way that satisfied the deeper questions I didn't even know how to ask. But for me, the answer wasn't found in religion. It was found in the books I read and the people I admired, the thinkers, the philosophers, the people who tried to understand the world with logic and reason. As I grew older, I became more skeptical. I didn't see any evidence for God or religion. In fact, I thought people who believed in God were naive or even weak. I looked at religion as something that might have served people in ancient times, but not in the modern world. The more I studied, the more I became convinced that belief in God was just a product of human weakness, a way for people to cope with the unknown, a crutch for those who couldn't face the harsh reality of life. I didn't need any of that. I had my mind, and that was all I needed to make sense of the world. I went on to become a professor of art and philosophy. I studied the great thinkers of history and spent my time trying to rationalize and explain everything. I found comfort in the words of philosophers who believed that reason was the key to understanding life. To me, their words made perfect sense. I spent my days teaching young minds to think critically, to question everything, to search for truth through reason, not faith. Religion, for me, was a relic of the past, a crutch for the unthinking masses. I felt secure in my worldview. I thought I had everything figured out. The universe was a vast, impersonal place, and I was just another piece of the puzzle, nothing more, nothing less. I didn't believe in an afterlife. I didn't believe in God. When we died, that was the end of it. There was nothing more. I lived my life as if that was all there was to it, one life to live, and nothing beyond. Life was what you made of it. It was a simple, straightforward philosophy, and it worked for me. Or so I thought. I couldn't have been further from the truth. In 1985, my health began to deteriorate. I went to the hospital for what seemed like a routine issue, nothing alarming, just a checkup for what I assumed was a minor problem. But things quickly took a turn for the worse. What started as something relatively small began escalating rapidly. I was diagnosed with a serious medical condition, something that I hadn't even considered. And just like that, my body began to shut down. I felt it slowly, a creeping sensation as if the life I had always taken for granted was slipping away. The physical decline was undeniable. It started with pain, then weakness, and finally, a suffocating exhaustion that took hold of me, pulling me deeper and deeper into a state of helplessness. At first, I didn't really know what to think. But as the days passed and the doctors did what they could, the reality began to set in. My body wasn't responding. It was breaking down, and I could do nothing about it. I was no longer in control. In that moment, I had to confront something I had never once considered, my own mortality. I was lying in that hospital bed, watching the medical staff rush around me, trying to stabilize me, but I could feel it. The strength was draining from me. My body was failing. And in the midst of all that, the one thing I didn't feel was fear. I had no belief in an afterlife, no reason to be scared. In my mind, death was just the end. No more, no less. I wasn't afraid of what came next because I didn't believe there was anything next. The idea of an afterlife, of anything continuing after death, was simply something I had dismissed my entire life. When death finally came for me, I simply assumed it would be like turning off a light. Quiet. Final. No more struggles. No more pain. Just an end. And so, as I lay there in that hospital bed, feeling weaker by the minute, I wasn't frightened. In a way, I felt resigned. I thought to myself that it was simply how life works. You live, and then you die. That's all there was to it. The doctors and nurses continued to work, but in my mind, I was already preparing for the inevitable. My life had reached its conclusion. I thought that was the end of the story. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. I remember the moment I left my body. It was as if everything became suddenly still and calm. One moment, I was there, struggling to breathe, and the next, I was floating above myself, looking down at the doctors and nurses frantically trying to resuscitate me. It was surreal. Like watching a scene in a movie, but somehow, I was both detached and deeply aware of what was happening. I could see my body, still lying on that hospital bed, my chest rising and falling with the shallow breaths the doctors were fighting to force into me. But I wasn't in that body anymore. I was outside it. The sensation was strange. Not frightening at first, but strange. I felt light, almost weightless. I wasn't tethered to the physical world anymore, and that was the first realization that something profound was happening. Then, everything changed. The calmness I had felt gave way to something else, something darker. I started to move, not floating, but descending. I was no longer just an observer above my body. I was being pulled downward, as if gravity itself had shifted. The sense of calm disappeared, replaced by a growing coldness. I felt a chill creep into my very soul. It was an overwhelming sensation that seemed to come from deep within me, not from the surroundings. I could feel it in my bones. I began to panic. I tried to stop myself, tried to fight against the pull, but it was no use. I was descending, helpless to do anything about it. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. It wasn't just a lack of light, it was a suffocating void, a thick, heavy blackness that pressed in on all sides. It felt like the very air had been sucked out of the space around me. I couldn't see anything but darkness, but I could feel it. I could feel the emptiness, the absence of all life. It was a loneliness unlike any I had ever known, a feeling that I had been utterly abandoned by everything, by everyone, by any form of light or hope. The darkness was all-encompassing, and with it came a sense of terror that seemed to grow stronger by the second. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of anything that might offer comfort. And then, I wasn't alone anymore. Strange, shadowy figures began to surround me. At first, I couldn't make sense of what they were. They didn't have clear shapes, but I knew they were there. Their presence was unmistakable. They moved in the dark, closing in around me, whispering things I couldn't understand but that felt like a deep assault on my soul. The whispers were full of malice, cruel and mocking. I could feel them, pressing in closer. They weren't just watching, they were feeding off my fear and pain, feeding off my confusion, my helplessness. The fear I felt, this was real fear, like nothing I had ever experienced before. It was primal. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I had nowhere to go. I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in this horrible, dark expanse. The shadowy figures swarmed closer, and I could sense their malicious energy. They weren't human, not in any sense I understood. They were more like dark energies, things that thrived on suffering. Their presence was so suffocating, so invasive, that I felt as though I was being consumed by them, piece by piece. They weren't merely tormenting me, they were enjoying my suffering. It was as if my fear and pain were exactly what they had been waiting for. I struggled, but it was futile. The more I fought, the tighter their grips seemed to become. I was in a place where there was no escape, no way out. It felt like an eternity in hell. I had no concept of time, but it didn't matter. Every second dragged on endlessly. The torment, the suffocating darkness, the coldness, it was unbearable. It felt as though my very soul was being consumed, that everything I had ever been was slowly being erased, piece by piece. There was no mercy here. There was no end to the suffering, no light, no hope. All I could do was exist in the fear, trapped in this terrifying place with no way of knowing how to escape. It was the kind of experience that felt like it was beyond human understanding. It wasn't just fear, it was despair on a level that defied reason. And yet, in the midst of it all, something else began to stir within me, a single, desperate thought that I didn't even recognize at the time. A cry, a plea, deep within my soul. I didn't know who I was calling to, but in that moment I knew I had to reach out, somehow, to anyone, to anything. Because this wasn't supposed to be the end. In my darkest moment, I realized there was nothing I could do. I was lost. Completely, utterly lost. There was no escape from the suffocating darkness that surrounded me. Every attempt to fight, to resist, had been in vain. I was trapped, caught in an endless void of fear and despair. It felt like everything that I had ever known, everything I had ever believed, had been ripped away, leaving me with nothing but this overwhelming sense of hopelessness. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know what to do. But then, something inside me, something I didn't even know was there, drove me to call out for help. God, if you exist, help me! I shouted, even though I had never believed in him. It was a desperate cry, a cry of someone who had nowhere else to go. I hadn't believed in God, hadn't thought there was anything beyond the physical world. But in that moment, in that terrifying place, I found myself calling out to something, to someone. A part of me that I didn't even recognize, buried deep within, cried out for help. I had no idea why or how I even knew to do it, but I called. And in doing so, I had no idea what would happen next. In that moment of complete despair, I saw it. I saw a light, brilliant, pure, and full of love. It pierced through the darkness like nothing I had ever seen. It wasn't like the light of the sun or a lamp. This light was different. It felt alive, and it felt like it was coming from beyond everything. As it grew brighter, it began to fill the void around me, pushing the darkness away. The light was so powerful, yet so gentle, and in its presence, I felt something shift within me. It was as though the very core of my being was being drawn to it, like a magnet pulling me closer, giving me something I had lost, hope. And then, from that light, a figure emerged. I could hardly believe what I was seeing, but there he was. It was Jesus Christ. He came to me, not in a blazing display of power, not in some grand show of force, but with an overwhelming, unspoken grace. He stood before me with a presence so full of peace, so full of compassion, that I could hardly comprehend it. His very being radiated love. I had spent my life seeking answers through reason and intellect, dismissing anything that couldn't be explained, and yet, here I was, standing before the living truth of something far beyond anything I had ever known. He looked at me with eyes full of compassion and love, not judgment. There was no anger in his gaze, no condemnation, no rebuke. His eyes were full of understanding, of mercy, as if he had known me all along. "Howard, you don't need to be afraid anymore," he said. "I've always loved you." At first, I was too overwhelmed to speak. I couldn't believe what was happening. How could this be real? How could I, someone who had spent his life dismissing such things, be standing here, face to face with the one I had never believed in? But even in the face of my disbelief, I felt something I had never felt before. It was a love, so deep, so real, that it erased all my fear and confusion. In an instant, every doubt, every logical argument that had once kept me at a distance from God, vanished. All that was left was this overwhelming sense of being known, of being seen for who I truly was, no pretenses, no defenses, just me, completely exposed yet accepted. The love that poured from him was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was as though all the pain, all the fear, all the struggle I had ever known in my life was being swallowed up by this love, this perfect love that filled every empty space in my soul. I had always thought that love was a human concept, something that could be explained and rationalized. But this love? It was divine. It was beyond understanding. And it was for me. For someone like me. I couldn't speak. I was too overwhelmed by the depth of what I was feeling, the intensity of the presence standing before me. It wasn't just a man. It wasn't just a figure. It was God, standing there with me in the most personal, intimate way. And in that moment, I knew I was safe. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. All the questions, all the confusion, all the fears, everything that had once weighed me down, were gone. Replaced by a love that transcended everything I had ever known. I didn't understand it all. But I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Jesus took me by the hand, and we began walking together. There were no words at first, just a profound, silent understanding that we were moving forward. As we walked, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me, a peace so profound it felt like it was entering every part of my being. The suffocating darkness, the terrifying shadows that had once surrounded me, faded away completely. The fear and confusion that had gripped my soul were gone. I was no longer in that place of torment. I was with Jesus, and that was all that mattered. We moved through the void, but it wasn't empty. As we walked, the void began to transform. What started as darkness shifted into something entirely different. We walked through landscapes so beautiful, so full of life and color, that I couldn't even describe them fully. I saw places that felt untouched by the hands of man, places that seemed to exist beyond time itself. It was as if we were walking through the fabric of the universe itself, glorious, serene, and full of light. Each step we took seemed to bring me closer to something I had always longed for but never understood. The beauty was indescribable, but it wasn't just the landscapes that left me in awe. It was the feeling that came with them, the overwhelming sense of peace, of belonging. As we moved through these places, I could feel my soul healing. The pain, the confusion, the weight of all the years I had spent searching for meaning, all of it was being lifted. I felt lighter, more whole with every step. My heart was opening, and I could sense the truth beginning to take root inside me. For the first time, I felt truly alive, not just physically, but spiritually. I was experiencing a depth of existence I had never known. It wasn't just the surroundings that changed, something within me was changing too. Jesus, walking beside me, was not just guiding me through these incredible landscapes, he was speaking to me, teaching me things I had never imagined. We walked slowly, side by side, and he began to share with me the wisdom of the universe, of life itself. Jesus spoke to me about love, about forgiveness, about how the world we live in is a reflection of the choices we make. He told me that everything in this life, our struggles, our victories, our pain, our joy, was connected by the way we choose to live, by the way we choose to love. The world is a mirror, Howard, he said. It reflects the love you give and the love you withhold. It reflects the choices you make every day. You are never alone in your journey, but you must choose to see the light in the world, in yourself, in others. His words resonated deeply within me. I had spent so much of my life focused on intellectual pursuits, on material success. I had spent years thinking that life's meaning was in accomplishments, in accolades, in proving myself to others and to the world. But Jesus showed me that this wasn't the point at all. Life wasn't about success or wealth. It wasn't about being right or proving a point. It was about relationships, about love, about connecting with God and with others in a meaningful way. I understood, for the first time, the meaning of life. I said, my voice trembling with the weight of the realization. It's not about achievement or recognition. It's about love. It's about being present with others, forgiving, and sharing in the joy and pain of this world together. Jesus smiled, a smile that seemed to fill the universe with warmth. Yes, Howard. Life is about love, about the love you give and the love you allow others to give you. It's about seeing the beauty in the world, in each person, even in the midst of pain and difficulty. Everything you experience is a reflection of the love you choose to share. As he spoke, I could feel my heart opening wider, embracing the truth in a way that was both humbling and freeing. For the first time in my life, I saw the world differently. I had spent so much of my life searching for answers through intellect, through logic, through reason. But now, I understood. The answers weren't found in books or theories. They were found in love, in giving, in forgiving, in being present with others. It was the relationships we form that give life meaning, not our individual successes or failures. We walked through those beautiful landscapes, and with every step, I felt more at peace. The sense of heaviness I had carried with me for so long was gone. I felt light, free, and whole. And I knew, deep within me, that this journey with Jesus wasn't just an experience to remember. It was a call to live differently. To live with love as my guiding principle. To connect with others in a way that transcends the surface and reaches into the deepest parts of our souls. As we continued to walk, I realized that the beauty around me wasn't just a physical beauty, it was a spiritual beauty. The world itself, everything around me, was a reflection of the love that God had poured into it. And in that moment, I knew that my life had to change. I could no longer live the way I had. I had to live with love, with compassion, with understanding. The journey with Jesus had shown me that the true meaning of life was simple: love God, love others, and allow love to heal and transform every part of my being. Eventually, Jesus stopped and turned to me. His presence was still so warm, so comforting, but there was a shift in the air. It wasn't just the landscapes we had been walking through, it was something in the very way he looked at me. A look that told me this moment was coming to a close. You have a choice now, he said softly. You can stay here with me, or you can return to your body and continue your life. It's up to you. For a moment, I was frozen. The choice felt impossible. How could I leave this place of peace? How could I leave the love that enveloped me, the healing, the clarity? How could I return to the chaos and struggles of the world I had come from? Yet, as I stood there with him, I knew something deep within me. I wasn't finished. Not yet. There was more for me to do, more to understand. The life I had lived, the life I thought I understood, had been so far from the truth of what I had just experienced. I had been shown something so pure, so real, that I couldn't ignore it. But I also understood that I had unfinished business. I thought of my family, my friends, my work, and everything I had left behind. I felt the weight of a calling, of something that still needed to be shared, something I needed to do with the truth that had been revealed to me. I knew that this peace, this love, wasn't just meant to stay with me. It was meant to be shared, to be lived out. I knew I had more to learn, more to experience, and more to give. So I looked at Jesus, and without hesitation I said, "I want to return." The moment I made that choice, everything around me seemed to shift. The landscapes faded away, and I felt myself being pulled, not by force, but by a sense of purpose. I felt my soul being drawn back to my body. I was leaving the beauty of that place, but I wasn't leaving what I had learned. That would stay with me forever. Suddenly, I was back in my body, gasping for air. The sensation was shocking. I felt the weight of my body again, the cold hospital bed beneath me. I could hear the beeping of machines, the sounds of the doctors and nurses trying to revive me. It was as though I had been thrust back into the world I had left behind, and yet I was forever changed. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I had come back to life, but it wasn't the same life I had left. I was different. Something deep inside me had shifted. The doctors were there, working urgently, trying to stabilize me, but all I could feel was the intense clarity and peace that now resided within me. The confusion, the fear, the doubts, they were gone. I had crossed into another realm and returned, and I knew, in that moment, that I had been given a second chance. But it wasn't just a return to life, it was a return with a mission. I had seen the truth, and now it was time to live it. And in that moment I realized that everything I had believed before, everything I had lived for, was a fraction of the true purpose I was now meant to embrace. The love, the peace, the transformation I had experienced, it was all to be shared, to be lived out with every step I took. I had returned, yes, but I wasn't returning to the same life. I was coming back with a new understanding, a new heart, and a new purpose. After that experience, everything changed. I knew I couldn't go back to being the same person I was before. The Jesus I had met was real, and I had to follow him. There was no way to ignore the truth of what I had experienced. I had seen his love, his compassion, and his peace in a way that I could no longer deny. The logical, skeptical person I had been, the one who didn't believe in anything beyond the physical world, was gone. And in his place stood someone who knew, deep in his soul, that God was real, that Jesus was real, and that the life I had been living before was nothing compared to the one I was now called to live. I became a Christian, something I never thought I would do. I had spent years mocking religion, dismissing faith as foolishness. But when I met Jesus, everything shifted. It wasn't just a change of religion, it was a complete transformation of who I was. My entire worldview, my purpose in life, everything I had once held dear, was turned upside down. I wasn't just accepting a set of beliefs, I was accepting a new way of life. A way of living that was based on love, forgiveness, and faith. I no longer saw the world the way I had before. I saw it through the eyes of Jesus, through the eyes of someone who had encountered the living God. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, but also a deep responsibility. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at meaning. And I knew that I couldn't keep this to myself. I had experienced something so profound, so life-changing, that I couldn't just go back to my old life and pretend nothing had happened. The transformation was too great, and the love I had encountered was too powerful to ignore. Since then, I've dedicated my life to telling others about what happened to me. I want to help people understand that God is real, that Jesus loves them, and that there is always hope, no matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter how far you've fallen, how lost you feel, or how skeptical you might be. I was once just like you, lost, confused, and searching for meaning. But when I encountered Jesus, everything changed. If he could meet me in my darkest moment, he can meet you in yours. I know now, without a doubt, that the love I felt from Jesus is available to everyone. It's not reserved for a select few, or for those who have it all together. It's for anyone who is willing to open their heart, to ask, to seek. And when you do, he will be there. Just as he was there for me. I stand before you as a living testament to God's grace. If you're struggling, if you're lost, or if you're skeptical, I urge you to open your heart. God is real, and he is ready to meet you just as he met me. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you this: his love is real, and it has the power to change everything. It changed me, and it can change you too. So, wherever you are on your journey, I encourage you to take that first step. You may not have all the answers, but trust me when I say, when you take that step towards Him, He will be there to walk with you. And just like me, your life will never be the same. What happened to me wasn't just a near-death experience. It was a spiritual awakening. I went from a life of skepticism and isolation to a life filled with love, peace, and purpose. I realized, in that moment with Jesus, that everything I thought I knew about life and death was wrong. I had always believed that we were alone in this world, that life was just about what we could see, touch, and understand. But now I know that no matter where we go in life, we are never alone. God is always with us, guiding us, loving us. The Bible says in Hebrews 13 verse 5, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." This verse has become a cornerstone of my faith. No matter how far we feel from God, no matter how lost or uncertain we may be, He is always there, waiting for us to turn to Him. And in Matthew 28 verse 20, Jesus promises, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." That promise is real, and I've felt it. God is with us through every trial, every struggle, and every moment of joy. If my story has touched you in any way, I encourage you to open your heart. Know that God loves you, and He is always with you, no matter what. If you're moved by what you've heard today, please subscribe, like, comment, and share this testimony with your family and friends. There is always hope, and there's always a way to find peace in Him. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. May God bless you abundantly.